Now we'd like to introduce Brother Lister with this fine Bible topic, Why Fear the True God? I have to share something with you that's somewhat sad. I cut this column out from the obituary column yesterday, and it deals with a man that none of you probably know a thing about. Really, I don't know much about him. I do know, as it says, he was born on January 22nd, 1923. And just a few days ago, he passed away at the age of 81. What do I know about this man? I can say some things, even though I've never met him. I do know that during that lifespan that he had, he spent probably some years going through some schooling, maturing through his teenage years. Eventually, he did get married, had children. He entered into the workforce at some time and spent probably 40 or 50 years trying to make a living, trying to make ends meet, struggling to pay the bills. Eventually, when he got to the point that he could retire, his health was already deteriorating some. Possibly he had some money saved up for retirement, possibly not much. And so he continued to struggle to make ends meet. His health continued to deteriorate until he passed away a few days ago at the age of 81. What did he experience during that life? I know at times he got sick. He suffered tragedies. He saw loved ones pass away. He suffered from time to time. And this is just typical because this is what all of us experience during the brief 70 to 80 years that we live, isn't it? That's about how long we live. And our life course pretty much follows the same pattern. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, Solomon painted a picture of the human situation. He too saw the same thing amongst people that lived in his days, and he saw it in himself. What it was like during the brief time that we live here on this earth. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 22 and 23. Notice how Solomon described our normal life. He says, "For what does a man come to have for all his hard work and for the striving of his heart with which he is working hard under the sun? For all his days his occupation means pains and vexation. Also during the night his heart just does not lie down. This too is mere vanity." So isn't that true? Much of what people experience in life today is pains and vexation. And we have good times. We're happy at times. We enjoy many things in this life. But there are many things, too, that we don't enjoy, is there? So Solomon thought about this situation. And keep in mind, here's an individual that had divinely enhanced wisdom. Jehovah with his Spirit gave him that, divinely enhanced wisdom. So he thought about the normal course of human life. He considered the reality of human imperfection and how it led to eventually death. Solomon factored in God-given knowledge of the state of the dead and the prospects for any future life. And he reached a conclusion on what he felt was necessary for a person during that brief lifespan to find happiness, to live the best way of life. If you turn to the last part of his book here in Ecclesiastes, chapter 12. And this is what this whole talk is based on, the conclusion that Solomon reached here. In Ecclesiastes 12, verses 13 and 14. He said, "The conclusion of the matter, everything having been heard, is, fear the true God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole obligation of man. For the true God himself will bring every sort of work into the judgment in relation to every hidden thing as to whether it is good or bad." So fear the true God, keep his commandments. That's what Solomon's life experiences taught him. And we know from Solomon's life course, he had everything. He had all the money that a person could want during his lifetime. He was the Bill Gates of his day, very wealthy. He did practically anything a person could do or would want to do with that sort of money. And yet at the end, he didn't say, well, that was the best way of life. That's the thing that led to happiness. Pursuing things in the way of recreation or material things. And so many people, that's what they center their lives on, isn't it? During that lifespan, trying to find happiness in ways that Solomon could see it didn't work. It's not what made him happy. Where did he find his happiness? Fearing the true God, keeping his commandments. That's our entire obligation. That's what Jehovah expects of us. So think of how much anxiety is reduced in life if we do this. As we mentioned, so many waste their life searching, trying to find happiness in various ways. We don't have to do that. Solomon has done it for us. He's already examined these things, and he found what works. God's commandments are designed to minimize strife and anxiety in our lives. So living by them is truly the way to happiness. What has been the result of people ignoring these commandments and failing to show proper fear of God? Well, we can see it's the primary cause of the moral breakdown in the world today. And when you consider how people feel about homosexuality, fornication, adultery, they have no fear of God punishing them for those things, so they become so emboldened to do these. They don't feel in any way they should keep God's commandments. When we consider how people feel about crime and violence, if they can overcome that fear of the police, because they have no fear of God, so it's just that fear of the police and getting caught. It's the only thing that keeps many from getting involved in that. They feel like if it pays, why not? If you can get riches quickly, why not? But one thing that has contributed to this breakdown is the fact that God has not intervened. He's not done anything as people continue to become more wicked. And what has been the result then? Let's look at Ecclesiastes chapter 8, just back a few pages, and verse 11. It says, "Because sentence against a bad work has not been executed speedily, that is why the heart of the sons of men has become fully set in them to do bad." So isn't that true? People have not experienced any punishment from God for the things that they're doing. So they are so emboldened to do wrong. Just as with anybody, if they do something wrong, they get away with it, they're more likely to do that again, aren't they? Most feel that God is never going to do anything to them. So why should they fear Him? Why bother keeping His commandments if it makes no difference anyway? But notice what Solomon goes on to say in the next two verses there, 12 and 13. He says, "Although a sinner may be doing bad 100 times and continuing a long time as he pleases, yet I am also aware that it will turn out well with those fearing the true God, because they were in fear of Him. But it will not turn out well at all with the wicked one, neither will he prolong his days that are like a shadow, because he is not in fear of God." So notice it brings out, it will turn out well with those fearing God, because Jehovah can prolong His days far beyond the 70 or 80 years that we live now. But that won't be the case for the wicked one. They can practice these things, but eventually they're going to have to answer. Eventually, Revelation 14:7 will take place regarding them. So they feel that they can continue in this way as long as they please. But this will take place. Even though execution hasn't come speedily, Revelation 14:7 will eventually come. Here we're looking at the angel that's flying in mid-heaven declaring good news. And in verse 7 he says, "Fear God and give Him glory, because the hour of the judgment by Him has arrived." See, that will eventually come upon the wicked, the hour of judgment. And when that comes, only those fearing God and only those keeping His commandments will survive. So we need to fear God if we want to prolong our days. But what does that mean, to fear God? How are we to understand that phrase there? And how are we to develop that? One definition of fear of God is an awe and a profound reverence for the Creator and a wholesome dread of displeasing Him. So we can see from that fear of God really influences two important aspects of our lives. One, our attitude toward God, and two, our attitude toward conduct that God hates. Those two things affect everything that we do, all the decisions we make, and the way we live our life. Vine's Expository Dictionary, the New Testament words, says, "For Christians, this reverential fear is a controlling motive of life in matters both spiritual and moral." So it really does. It affects everything we do, as we'll consider. Let's look at each one of those aspects. First of all, our attitude toward God. How do we develop feelings of awe and reverence for our Creator? Well, when you see a beautiful landscape, see a beautiful snow-capped mountain, maybe in the foreground there's just a spectacular waterfalls, and then far beyond that, the sun is going down. It's just a beautiful sunset. When we see something like that, we're filled with awe, aren't we? We appreciate Him so much. But that feeling of awe is heightened when we discern the hand of God behind those things, when we realize that He is the Creator. He's made those things so that we might enjoy. When we also perceive, though, our own insignificance in comparison to those things, especially when we look up at the starry heavens and we discern just how small we are, then that profound awe leads to reverence, which moves us to thank Jehovah and to praise Him for all that He's done. As King David said at Psalm 139:14, he says, "I shall laud you because in a fear-inspiring way I am wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, as my soul is very well aware." Now David's just talking about the human body and the way it's made. He says it's fear-inspiring. How marvelous. When you take all the things that we see around us that Jehovah has created, that truly is fear-inspiring, isn't it? So such feelings of awe and reverence then produce this wholesome fear of God's power as our Creator and His authority as the rightful ruler of the universe. Now this second aspect, fear of God, it influences our attitude toward conduct that God hates. And this is something that our fear of God has to have. It has to have a wholesome dread of displeasing God and avoiding bad conduct. Why is that so important? Because of what the Bible tells us about Jehovah. We know that He's a God who does not tolerate unrighteousness and wickedness in any form. Now, the Bible also does say about Jehovah that He's slow to anger, He's abundant in loving kindness and truth, but it also says He will by no means give exemption from punishment. So if we were to deliberately practice what we know is wicked, then we will face the consequences from Jehovah. Now here's a powerful scripture I'm going to quote here. This is something Paul wrote to the Hebrews in 10:31. And this is powerful. He says, "It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God." And at least we need to feel that way, that we need to recognize His power when He brings judgment. So this wholesome fear of God is such a protection for us. It keeps us from getting involved in wrong conduct. A person fearing God then is going to take the knowledge that they have of God and they're going to use it in the right manner. It's going to help them to make decisions. For instance, it's going to help a person when it comes to deciding what they're going to watch on the television, or what type of movies they're going to view, or what type of music they're going to listen to. It helps them to decide who are they going to associate with at school or at their place of work. We want to make sure that we do nothing to profane God's name. So what are some things that we need to avoid? How could we make a list? Things that God does not want us to do. Here's a list I'm going to give you. Actually, let's let the Bible give you the list. It's in Galatians chapter 5. And here Paul enumerates various things that Jehovah hates, and so we likewise need to hate so we might avoid these things. In Galatians 5 verses 19 through 21, he says, "Now the works of the flesh are manifest, and they are fornication, uncleanness, loose conduct, idolatry, practice of spiritism, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, contentions, divisions, sects, envies, drunken bouts, revelries, and things like these." It's nice we had a recent magazine helping us to appreciate. This isn't all-inclusive right here, is it? It's things like these too. So anything that would be of this type. And these things are so common in the world today, aren't they? Fornication, so common. Featured in entertainment so often. Practice of spiritism too. So many people involved in that. And so many people entertained by individuals who are involved in these things. So very common. Many feel that really God is asking too much of us to avoid these things because it's what their natural inclination is towards. They feel like, why stop from doing things that we want to do, that our body wants to do? So such an attitude as this can really influence us if we don't reinforce our own wholesome fear and hatred for these things that Jehovah hates. We need to appreciate that these laws are really for our benefit. When Jehovah gives us laws, He's not depriving us in any way. He wants us to be happy. He wants us to have the best life. He wants to protect us from spiritual and physical dangers. Our relationship with Jehovah could be likened to that of a good human father who truly loves his children. He wants the best for them. Now, the children may not remember why in particular their father forbids them to play in the street. He may have laid out the reasons, but they just remember don't play in the street, but they may not remember why. But still, when they feel the impulse to chase that ball out into the street, maybe they're playing in the yard and a ball goes running across the street, and they feel that impulse to go out there, the thought of their father's prohibition holds them back, possibly saving them from getting injured or dying. So likewise with us, an adult's fear of Jehovah may restrain us from committing a wrong act. If we're faced with some temptation, then that prohibition against it comes to our mind, and it could save our life or keep us from ruining our life or the lives of others. Even when Jehovah exacts punishment for wrongdoing, we realize that's for our good. See, it helps us to avoid wrongdoing, or it helps us to repeat doing something that we may have done wrong. So we appreciate that Jehovah punishes for wrongdoing, and it can help us. How do we develop and cultivate this fear of God? This is done simply by focusing on spiritual matters. And to do this, there are 4 key things that we need to do. The first one, read and study the Bible daily and diligently. Something we've been encouraged so much to do in recent years. The Bible graphically describes the results of disregarding God's commandments and abandoning true worship. We have real-life experiences in the Bible of individuals who might have been overtaken by immorality or greed or pride, jealousy, and we can see the end result for them. Some of these individuals may have served Jehovah for many years, but at one crucial moment, their fear of God wasn't strong enough to keep them from getting into wrongdoing. So we can read these accounts, we can meditate on them, and it will strengthen our resolve to make sure that we don't, commit the same mistakes that they had committed. Now, some have said that experience is the best teacher, and in some ways it is, but when it comes to self-indulgence, it's not the best teacher. How much better to learn from those who've suffered the consequences without having to do it ourselves. Now, the second thing that we can do to cultivate such fear is diligently make use of the publications provided by Jehovah's organization. And how many organizations on this earth have anything to compare with the spiritual food that we have coming from Jehovah's organization? For instance, just in this book here, actually 2-part series, volume 1 and 2 of Isaiah's prophecy, verse-by-verse explanation of a very, very difficult book to understand. The book of Isaiah. Here we see that God's people, they had lost that fear of Jehovah, the nation of Israel, and they were involved in many things that were wrong. And Jehovah had to discipline them. See, when we consider a book like this, it helps us to appreciate how beneficial it is for us to live by God's commandments and to fear Him. This book here, Draw Close to Jehovah, which we're looking forward to studying very soon. How much this helps us to appreciate the type of God Jehovah is. How He is worthy of our obedience to Him, and how we should rightly fear Him and the power that He has. The Watchtower Library, you could take fear of God and plug that in and come up with just a wealth of information. So again, you don't find information like this anywhere else, in any of the churches of Christendom or any other organization, to help us to have that fear of Jehovah. Now, the third thing we need to do to cultivate such fear is regularly attend and participate in Christian meetings. We have Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. That's a command to us, not to forsake the gathering of ourselves together. So it is a matter of showing fear of God. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. I notice that your meeting attendance has dropped some over the past few months. When we miss a meeting, Jehovah knows why we're missing the meeting. The elders may not know why, or the other publishers may not know why, but Jehovah knows why. So we do have that proper fear of Him, that we recognize He has commanded us to meet together, to come together to worship Him, to unite in taking in this knowledge. So we need to be here. But we should also participate at our meetings. You know, some never participate at the meetings at all. And it could be because of maybe fear of embarrassment, raising their hand, or maybe making themselves look a little bit foolish. Maybe the comment wouldn't be correct. And so they have that fear of what others might think. But see, we're weighing that against fear of God and what He wants from us. He wants us to come to the congregation and praise Him before the rest of our brothers and sisters. So which is stronger, that fear of Jehovah or fear of man, or fear of looking bad? So it's so important to participate here. Now the fourth thing we need to do is really to take all this information that we receive in these various ways, our meetings, through our reading and study, and then apply that scriptural knowledge. Never failing to do what Jehovah wants us to do. We need to appreciate there's nothing we can hide from Jehovah. Every thought of ours, every deed, everything we do, Jehovah is aware of it. He sees that. It's important to recognize this because of what it says at Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 13. So this is a good thing to keep in mind, especially when maybe we're not only faced with temptation, but just faced with this thought of be kind to yourself. Don't do what you should be doing. How should we feel about that? Hebrews 4:13, it says, "There is not a creation that is not manifest to His sight, but all things are naked and openly exposed," notice this, "to the eyes of Him with whom we have an accounting." So we have an accounting with Jehovah for all the things that we do, or all the things that we fail to do. So this should give us incentive to obey His commands, to make sure that we are obedient to Him. When we're tempted to do what's wrong, we always want to remember that Jehovah is watching us. He's paying attention. If we keep this thought in mind, it can really be a protection for us. It can keep us from a wrong course. There are so many reasons why we fear displeasing God and why we love God. For one, God is real to us, isn't He? He's not like the gods that are worshipped in so many other religions, who He's very distant, abstract, a mystery to them. Some feel almost as if God put man here but then left us to our own devices. Jehovah isn't that way. We know He's a God that has feelings, that we can cause Him pain, we can hurt Him, but we can also make Him joyful, can't we? So He's very real to us. Now, since He's real, His authority causes us to have a proper fear of Him. He's not someone that is abstract. He's a real person. So how can we compare this fear? You might consider the example of a human judge. There's a certain amount of fear in his position and his authority. When the judge comes in the room and maybe you're on trial, you have a respectful fear of him, don't you? Because of the power that he has to possibly punish you. It's similar with God. He has that power, so we recognize Him as a real person in our lives that can punish. Now, does this mean that our fear of God is based solely on His power to punish wrongdoers? Some people have felt that way in the past, in centuries past, and that's why they've used such teachings as hellfire to try to instill that fear into people, to make them feel that, yes, God is a God who will punish you, and He's going to punish you severely. But such a morbid fear as this, it doesn't draw us close to God at all, does it? It really discourages us. It destroys our hope. With Jehovah, when we get to know His qualities, when we see that all that He has done for us and all that He will do for us, it fuels our desire to serve Him. We want to draw close to Him. James 1 verse 17 says, "Every good gift and every perfect present is from above, for it comes down from the Father." Now, that doesn't sound like a God who would have hellfire, or the type that wants to instill terror into people. Every good gift, every perfect present comes down from Him. So having an appreciation for God's loving kindness, His goodness, this leads to a proper fear of incurring His displeasure. So this would be wholesome. It's not morbid. It's not something that causes us to turn away, but it moves us to do what's right, to be firm for what is right, and not compromise. Jehovah is not like the ancient Greek deity Phobos. That's where we get the word phobia, describing the various fears that people have. This ancient Greek deity, Phobos, was a sinister god. He inspired terror in the Greek people. Jehovah's not like that at all. He's not like the Hindu goddess Kali, which is depicted as bloodthirsty, using corpses, snakes, and skulls as ornaments. Can you imagine Jehovah depicting himself that way in the Bible? No. Jehovah's not like that. So godly fear attracts us. It doesn't repel us. It's intertwined with love and appreciation for Jehovah. So godly fear draws us to Jehovah. Now, what are the benefits from having such a fear of Jehovah? Again, we're going to consider 4 points. The first one is having fear of God keeps us alive spiritually. Having fear of God keeps us alive spiritually. Godly fear is based on faith. It's tied in with love and trust in Jehovah. And because of this, we have no fear of approaching Jehovah in prayer at any time, knowing that He'll listen to us. In 1 John chapter 4 and verse 18, the Apostle Paul here shows the type of God that we're worshiping is someone that freely encourages us to approach Him and doesn't reject us in any way. 1 John 4:18 says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love throws fear outside." That is that fear of being rebuffed or being rejected by Jehovah. It says, "Because fear exercises a restraint. Indeed, he that is under fear has not been made perfect in love." So if you had that feeling that every time you went to Jehovah in prayer, He was going to rebuff you, and then eventually that restraint, you're not even wanting to pray to Him. But Jehovah wants us to pray to Him. And we feel comfortable about approaching Him. We feel close to Jehovah. We feel secure. And so that helps us to keep alive spiritually. The second benefit from godly fear is that it drives out fear of man. In Psalm 118, verse 6, notice the confidence that the psalmist here had when it comes to his feelings towards individuals that could do us harm, could threaten us. In Psalm 118, verse 6, the psalmist here says, "Jehovah is on my side. I shall not fear. What can earthling man do to me?" Isn't that true? Earthling man can do nothing to us that Jehovah could not correct. Most people are afflicted by fear of man to a greater or lesser degree. Even the apostles, the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus was arrested, remember they abandoned Him and fled. In the days of King Jehoiakim, Elijah the prophet, he was so overcome with fear, he fled down to Egypt, left his prophetic service, and fled out of the country, only to eventually be brought back and be put to death by the king. So people have shown that fear of man, but if we have a proper fear of Jehovah and trust in Him, we are able to do what is right without fear of what man can do to us. So even if an employer, for instance, threatens to fire us because we won't get involved in some dishonest practice, we don't fear what he's going to do or could do to us. We maintain our honesty and our obedience to Jehovah. If we have unbelieving family mates who oppose us and threaten us and try to get us to stop serving Jehovah, that doesn't concern us. Obedience to Jehovah, that's the main thing we're concerned about. Such fear and trust gives you young ones in school the courage to identify yourselves as Jehovah's Witnesses and not try to hide that fact from your friends. Godly fear can fortify you, can help you to stand up to the ridicule of classmates. And young people can be so cruel sometimes. We recognize that, you young people. But Jehovah can be with you. He can fortify you. One teenage witness said, "What they think, that is what your classmates think, really doesn't matter. What Jehovah thinks is what counts." Of course, that's how all of us should feel, isn't it? So even if our life is threatened, even if our life is on the line and could take our life, fear of Jehovah removes any fear of man that would lead us to compromise. Now, we know we will be persecuted, and what will come in the future, we don't know how severe it will get. We know the apostles were flogged. Jesus Christ Himself was beaten and put to death. But Jehovah can strengthen us to endure whatever mankind brings up against us. We can come off victorious. If we are faithful, even if we are put to death, Jehovah will reward us if by means of a resurrection, and so be it. Now, this love for God, coupled with godly fear, it's what helped Jehovah's Witnesses to be able to withstand the horrors of the concentration camps in Germany. And when we read what they went through, we're just astounded, aren't we, by their endurance under such horrible conditions. One brother, Gustav Oschner, he was a witness in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. And he said that the SS, or the Nazi SS, shot August Dickmann, he was one of our brothers, and threatened to shoot the rest of us if we did not sign a paper renouncing our faith. None of us signed. We had more fear of displeasing Jehovah than of their bullets. So those brothers had the right attitude, didn't they? So fear of man, that leads to compromise. Fear of God makes us firm for what is right. So we want to be aware of Jehovah's power to protect us, or if we lose our life, that we have to have faith in that power that He has to resurrect people. If we have that, it will give us courage to overcome fear of man. Now, the third area in which we benefit from godly fear that we want to consider is that it helps us to avoid bad conduct. If we didn't have this fear of God, how would we feel about obeying His commands? Let's say His command to abstain from fornication. Okay, you have no fear of God whatsoever. How obedient are you going to be to those commands? Especially if it meant doing things that maybe our selfish, imperfect flesh craves or desires. No fear of God. It's going to make it very difficult. So having that fear of God, it keeps us from taking a course that could prove detrimental to us, to our spiritual health. If we respect God, we do not decide for ourselves what is good and what is bad. We leave that up to Jehovah. He sets the standards. We live by them. The world has things totally out of whack, don't they? They say that what is bad is good and what is good is bad. For instance, they would say homosexuality is good and anybody that disagrees is a bad, bad person. See, so everything is just backwards. But we don't agree with that thinking. We agree with Jehovah's thinking and his standards. Now, is it simply enough to know what Jehovah says is good and what he says is bad? Just to have that knowledge? No, that's not enough, is it? See, we have to have love for Jehovah, love for the things that he loves, and we need to have a hatred for what he hates. So once we take in that knowledge, we know that he doesn't like some things, we have to develop that hatred towards it. And this will move us to live in harmony with his standards. Godly fear can fortify us against a broad range of wrongdoing. It can help a person to overcome secret sins. That is, sins that are known only by themselves and Jehovah. Things that we might feel like no one else knows. But fear of Jehovah helps us to overcome these. It helps us to break free from slavery to alcohol abuse or drug abuse. One former drug addict in South Africa explained, says, as I took in knowledge of God, I also developed a fear of hurting or displeasing him. I knew he was watching, and I had a longing to be approved in his sight. It moved me to destroy the drugs that were in my possession by flushing them down the toilet. So godly fear has helped thousands of people in a similar way as it has helped this man. Now the fourth point, fear of God, a benefit that it brings is that it produces happiness. If you turn to Psalm 112, again, consider the psalmist's words here. 112 and verse 1. And notice what he recognized about fear of God. There he says, praise Jah, you people. Happy is the man in fear of Jehovah, in whose commands he has taken very much delight. So as he says, fear of Jehovah leads to happiness. If we have a proper fear, it keeps us ever appreciative of all that Jehovah has done for us. And the greatest happiness that can be ours from fearing Jehovah, it can lead to the reward of everlasting life. Those who fear Jehovah will receive that reward. Recall that we read in Ecclesiastes 8, 12, and 13, where it said, it will turn out well with those fearing the true God, because he will prolong his days to the point of endless life. Proverbs 22:4 says, "The result of humility and the fear of Jehovah is riches and glory and life." And we know that's the real life, not the life that this man experienced, or even we're experiencing now. This isn't the real life. Jehovah never intended for us to suffer in perfection. Now, fearing God does not in any way rule out loving Him. And this is a contradiction to many people. They don't understand how we can love God and fear Him at the same time. But this isn't a contradiction. Israelites were instructed by Jehovah, Deuteronomy 10:12. It says, "Fear Jehovah so as to walk in all His ways and to love Him." So fear Jehovah and love Him. So these two thoughts, really, fear of God and love of God, they're both very closely connected. Fear of God moves us to walk in His ways, and this in turn gives proof of our love for Him. So this is just something that's logical, simple. When we love someone, don't we rightly fear to hurt them or be displeasing to them? And so that's the feeling we have about Jehovah. We love Him, so we fear to displease Him. These are complementary, they're not contradictory qualities. Let's consider now some specific areas in which God has commanded us to observe His certain laws and principles. We read there in Ecclesiastes that we should fear God and keep His commandments. Now, what are some of the commandments that He expects us to keep to show we have proper fear of Him? Well, first area we'll consider is in the area of morality. And Jehovah has given us many standards in the area of morals that are for the highest good, aren't they, if we live according to them. Let's consider just one area in Romans chapter 13 and verse 13. As this describes or mentions something that's so common in the world today, it's just incredible how much this influences people. In Romans 13:13, it says, "As in the daytime, let us walk decently, not in revelries," and then notice drunken bouts. That's what we want to focus on there. Excessive drinking of alcoholic beverages, so common in the world today, and it's one of the first things we have to worry about our young ones. Being tempted towards trying alcoholic beverages because the kids in school feel that it's something they need to do. Are we benefited by obedience to this command and other commands that speak about alcohol abuse? Very much so. We can see the problems that it creates in a person's life. In fact, in our latest Awake magazine, the one dealing with the nuclear threat that you might have just received, it has a great article, "Is overdrinking really that bad?" Because many people feel that way. Is it really that bad? Not really, but this is what the World Health Organization states. It says it rates alcohol abuse as one of the top hazards to health worldwide. It is said that with the exception of tobacco addiction, abuse of alcohol causes more deaths and illnesses than the abuse of any other dependence-producing substance. And it drains the American economy alone of over $184 billion a year. So Jehovah's command is for our benefit, isn't it? To abstain from this. Now, Jehovah gives other commands. We'll just mention a few of them. 1 Thessalonians 4:3, abstain from fornication. Ephesians 4:28, let the stealer steal no more. Or Colossians 3:9, do not be lying to one another. See, these are definite areas where we need to hate what is bad. Again, because they are so common in the world, and so many people feel that they can get ahead by doing these things, by stealing or lying. Or they feel like, who are they harming? Why should I abstain from fornication? Because I'm not harming anybody. It's for my own pleasure. But we know the benefits from obeying these are numerous, aren't they? And just think of how employers look at us at work because they know we don't steal. They know we don't lie. Those things have proved beneficial for God's people, as we've read in many of our magazines. So when we are obedient to these, especially in areas where it's easy to get away with the sin, it really shows that we fear Jehovah, doesn't it? Now let's turn to John chapter 18 and consider the second commandment that we focus on. And this is in the area of neutrality. And in John 18, verse 36, in this account, Jesus is on trial before Pontius Pilate. And notice what Jesus said to him there. He says, my kingdom is no part of this world. If my kingdom were part of this world, my attendants would have thought that I should not be delivered up to the Jews, but as it is, my kingdom is not from this source. If a person were to ever fight for any reason, what do you think the best reason in the world would be to fight to protect the Son of God? Can you think of any better reason than that? And yet Jesus said, even in that instance, my attendants would not fight. Or when they did start to fight, he stopped them. He says they're not to fight in that instance. And so this helps us to appreciate the role that we have in this world, that we are no part of this world and we need to remain neutral. And this too has benefited God's people in many ways. And our latest yearbook has a nice experience in the Congo. And this is a place where, much like Malawi, they had to get political party cards if they wanted to keep from being persecuted, and they had so many conflicts between tribes in the Congo. And so one brother and some other publishers, it says, were rounded up by rebels who were looking for local administration chiefs whom they planned to execute. When asked to which tribe he belonged, the brother replied, "I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses." Surprised by this answer, the rebel leader asked for an explanation. The brother witnessed from the scriptures, after which the rebel leader declared, "If all people were like you, there would be no wars." Isn't that true? And so he let the brothers go. If all people kept our neutral stand, there wouldn't be any more wars. So what a beneficial commandment Jehovah has given us. Let's look at the area of child training. And remember, we're discussing commandments of God. How we raise our children shows not just love for them, but more importantly, our love for Jehovah and our fear of God. So here's his command, Proverbs 22:6. He says, "Train up a boy according to the way for him. Even when he grows old, he will not turn aside from it." So that's what Jehovah wants. He wants these young ones to grow up to fear him and keep his commandments. That puts a big responsibility upon you parents. So many children in the world today receive so little discipline and so little training. We can't be that way. We have to be consistent in giving discipline. It proves our love for our children, but as we said, it also proves our love and our fear of Jehovah. The fourth area, let's turn to Romans chapter 14 and verse 19. And this is a commandment. Keep in mind again, these are commandments Jehovah wants us to obey if we have that proper fear of him. Romans 14, verse 19. And that says, "So then, let us pursue the things making for peace and the things that are upbuilding to one another." Now in this regard, don't we appreciate our worldwide brotherhood, being able to come to our meetings and to experience the upbuilding association of our brothers and sisters? We need to contribute towards that, as it says here, by pursuing the things making for peace. And you think of pursuing, you're chasing after something because you're putting forth effort to hopefully attain that thing. What are the things making for peace in the congregation? Commendation, very important thing. Commend your brothers and sisters for maintaining their integrity, to continue to come here on a regular basis, because they're all dealing with problems and anxieties, and yet they continue plugging along, getting to the meetings, getting out in service, commenting here at meetings, doing their personal study. So commend one another. Or if you see one another down, encourage them, comfort them, build them up. And that would mean following this commandment here, pursuing the things making for peace. Now, does this pursuit of peace include only the brothers? Just turn back a page to chapter 12 and verse 18. And it says, "If possible, as far as it depends upon you, be peaceable with all men." So we want to show the same love and kindness to people who are not amongst us, that we might draw them to true worship. Now the fifth thing that Jehovah has commanded that we want to focus on, Matthew 24:14. We're going to be discussing this in our Watchtower lesson. It's preach the kingdom good news. This is something we just can't keep to ourselves, isn't it? It's knowledge that we have to share with others. It does require sacrifices on our part, giving up our own pursuits to take the time to go out into the ministry. What motivates us to do this? Fear of God, and also our love for him, and our love for our neighbors. We don't want to keep the good news to ourselves. We want them also to benefit from it. So these are just a few of the commandments that Jehovah has given us. And by our obedience to them, we prove our love for God. It gives us opportunity to prove that we do fear him. So we want to make sure we put Jehovah first in our life. We want to take the time to learn his ways and his principles and not have the attitude that ignorance is bliss, as so many people feel. That's not that way, isn't it? The more we know about Jehovah, the more we love him, the more we fear him. Let's just consider Ecclesiastes 12:13 one more time, because there's one thing that you want to take away from this talk. This is the thing that should resonate in our minds as we meditate on this material and think about it. And so this is what we want to take away. Ecclesiastes 12:13 says, the conclusion of the matter, everything having been heard, is, fear the true God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole obligation of man. So, in fear of Jehovah, let's keep on preaching about our loving Heavenly Father. Let's keep on obeying His commandments. Let's keep drawing closer to Him and increasing in that proper, respectful fear of Him. And if we do this, then we'll have the opportunity to prove our love and our fear of Him throughout eternity.